Why do the evil people in this world, the liars, cheats, and con artists, so often succeed? I have come to the conclusion that the real reason lies in the rest of humanity. Most of us on this planet are mostly honest, mostly decent. We tend to tell the truth in most situations and treat each other with some degree of kindness. Not surprisingly, we also take it for granted that those around us will behave the same way. But our assumption that most people are mostly honest makes us terribly vulnerable to those bastards who lie and cheat without a shred of conscience. They can fool us for quite a while and sometimes forever, and we'll never realize it. Since we don't lie and cheat, we can't suspect fast enough that others might be doing it to us. It was Gina Giannopoulos who taught me this painful lesson. Or I guess I should say Gina Giannopoulos McMillan because that's her married name. I'm Alex McMillan, her ex-husband. One morning, the engine of my Lexus started making some scary noises, so I dropped the car off at Marshall Motors, where Dominic has been taking care of my cars for about 10 years. He called me around lunchtime, but instead of telling me the car was fine, he said, "You'd better come down here and talk to me." When I arrived, he led me to a private office in the back of the building. "Alex, the engine's fine, just the belt's loose." But there was something else. He looked at me seriously. "Someone messed up the brake line." There was enough hydraulic fluid for normal stops, but if you had to go down a steep hill or stop in a hurry, you'd wreck the car. I stared at him open-mouthed. 6 months earlier, Gina and I had moved into a new, swanky, modern house in the suburbs. It was gorgeous, with cathedral ceilings and lots of glass, and it was surrounded by quiet woods. But it was also at the end of a cul-de-sac off the main street that ran steeply down the hill. If I had driven my car home that evening, I would almost certainly have been killed. After a couple minutes, I gathered my thoughts a bit. "Dominic, do me a favor, okay?" "Don't tell anyone about this yet." "Have you fixed it yet?" "No, boy. A crime has been committed here, or at least attempted." "I've got to call the police." "Okay." I thought some more. "How about we do this? Take a picture of the brake line and write everything up like you would for the police. But let's not call them yet. Just leave the car in the backyard, and I'll rent one of those clunkers you keep for a few days. There are security cameras on the property, right?" "Yes." Dominic looked doubtful. "Here's the thing. Whoever did this will want to cover it up when they find out I'm not dead. That's why I'm willing to bet they'll try to steal this car from the parking lot in the next few nights. I don't want to call the police until that happens. In the meantime, we'll have camera footage we can give them." 45 minutes later, I got out of the rented blue Corolla and left it at my driveway. I took the day off to think about what had happened. The attempt on my life had to be about money. I was president and co-founder of Apex, a $6.8 billion software company in Silicon Valley, and my first guess was that someone wanted to get me out of the way as part of an attack on the company. Carmelita, our cook and housekeeper, who usually worked from noon to 8 p.m., had the day off, and the house was quiet. Gina must have gone shopping or played tennis. I wandered aimlessly around the house, going over in my mind the possible culprits and reasons for what was happening. Picking up the phone, I spoke to Jeff Denham, an old friend of mine who runs the security firm Apex uses. Without explaining my reasons to him, I made it clear that I suspected some kind of problem. Either some financial irregularities already underway or a future attack on the company. We agreed that his financial experts would do a full audit of our computers and financial records. I gave Jeff a temporary password that would allow his people to access everything they needed from a desktop in my office, and told him I wanted it done discreetly. We would tell everyone that they were doing a routine audit. Then I called Meredith, my secretary of many years, and told her to enter a temporary password into my computer and that Jeff's guys would be coming over later in the day. With that done, I resumed my aimless wanderings. I went to our home computer and poked around, not expecting to find anything. Out of pure, idle curiosity, I tried to open some of Gina's files, including her email, and to my surprise, they were all password protected. What could Gina possibly have on our computer that she wouldn't want me to see? Unless you counted something unlikely like planning a surprise party I couldn't imagine. I made a mental note to ask her about it later. I was drinking tea in the kitchen at about 4:30 when Gina walked in. She took one look at me and practically fainted. I had never seen anything like it. Her mouth opened, she turned white, and her body collapsed against the door jamb. "Alex, what are you doing here?" I smiled softly. "Actually, honey, I live here. Remember?" She pulled herself together and sat down at the table across from me. Forcing herself to smile, she said, "Sure, babe. It's just, well, you're hardly ever home this early and I haven't seen your car outside." It all happened in an instant. I was about to tell her all about the brake line, but instead I just said, "There was a problem with the engine and I had to leave it at Dominic's for a few days. He rented one of their clunkers from me. That's what's in the driveway." Why didn't I tell her the truth? At the time, I think I thought it was because I didn't want to worry her. I didn't want to say, "By the way, honey, someone is trying to kill me." Why scare your wife? But when I thought about it later, the reason was something else entirely. Why was she so shocked to see me in the kitchen? Not just surprised, but stunned, as if it were the most unexpected thing in the world. I didn't understand her reaction, and the more I thought about it later, the more it gnawed at me. "Oh," she said, and I could see her trying to pull herself together. "It's great to have you back so early. What do you want to do about dinner? Why don't we go out now that Carmelita's gone?" "Great," she said. "Now I'm going to take a shower and maybe we'll go to Andante?" Then she quickly left the room, and a couple minutes later I heard the shower running. I put the cup in the sink and headed for the bedroom, deciding to wash up and change into something more casual before we went out. The door to the bedroom was almost closed, and to my surprise, as I approached, I heard Gina talking on the phone in a low, urgent voice. Why did she need to turn on the shower and then call someone? I didn't hear the ringing, so she must have called herself. I didn't hear anything special, just, "No, Dowdle, I have no idea." "No, of course not. Yeah, we'll have to..." "Okay, baby, bye." Not much, but more than enough to make me freeze in place. She was talking to Jeff Denham, my friend and security guru. His middle name was Dowd, and I'd called him Dowdle since about 8th grade. Gina had adopted that nickname from me, so there was no doubt who was on the other end of the line. I waited until she hung up the phone and headed for the bathroom. Then I waited another 2 minutes before I went into the bedroom and changed. I washed my face in the guest bathroom so as not to disturb Gina's shower. My mind was spinning with thoughts. What the hell was going on? Could Gina and my friend Jeff have had something to do with what happened to my car? Despite all the events of the last 10 minutes, it seemed quite impossible. Gina and I had been married for 8 years. I was 46, she was 37. I had been married and divorced once before, when I was 20, and had 2 wonderful children whom I saw only on summer vacations and visited occasionally because their mother had moved them 2,000 miles away after the divorce. I first saw Gina when she was touring the Apex offices while working as a sales rep for a computer support firm we did business with. I decided to find out who she was and then arrange a lunch date with a friend from her company who might happen to know us. It was worth the effort. Even if you woke her from a sound sleep, Gina would be one of the 10 most beautiful women you've ever seen. And when she has time for clothes and makeup, she's simply stunning. Nearly 6 feet tall, with long raven black hair and dark eyes, high cheekbones and a bold mouth, and a trim, athletic body. She also has a look, a way of walking, moving, presenting herself, looking you in the eye that says, "I know I'm sexy, and I know you think so too." From my very first interest in her, I knew I would have a lot of competition, and it was a pleasant surprise that we soon started dating. Then dating seriously, and about a year later got engaged and married. I'm not bad looking, but I'm not handsome, and I'm 9 years older than Gina. I knew that my success in business and my money had to be part of her attraction, and it didn't bother me. Why be successful if it's not going to help you hook up with gorgeous women? We had an ironclad prenup that said she could get no more than $1 million if we divorced in less than 20 years, so I was sure she loved me as much as she loved my money. We would have a very good life together, and if she enjoyed being rich with me, that was fine, as long as it also made me happy. Gina made me very happy. She spent a lot of money, but I had it, so that wasn't a problem. She was energetic and upbeat, very outgoing and full of fun. She made lots of friends, dragged me to lots of parties and flirted with lots of guys, but at the end of the night she would come home with me and usually have a blast. Gina was experienced and enthusiastic. She was as adventurous in bed as she was in everything else. She loved hang gliding, rock climbing, and things like that. She would drive me to exhaustion, and I was perfectly happy with that. But the events of the last few hours had changed everything, or at least threatened to change everything. I had to think hard, primarily because Dowdle seemed to be involved in this case. Under other circumstances, he would have been the first person I would have called. In fact, I had already called him and asked his people to start looking into Apex's finances. Now I realize that I may have made the wrong move in alerting him to the fact that I had some suspicions. Thank God I hadn't mentioned that the car had been broken into. Neither he nor Gina knew that I knew about it, at least not yet. That evening, I put my acting skills to the test. Gina and I went to Andante, where we had a good dinner and a nice bottle of Chianti. I was incredibly anxious but tried my best not to appear withdrawn or aloof. I kept the conversation flowing, and when Gina took off her shoe and ran her foot over my leg under the table, I responded with a smile and a few discreet caresses. I knew the evening would end with athletic exercise in bed. That was Gina's habit, after a nice dinner with good wine, and pondered how to proceed. One of my talents is the ability to ponder a problem with part of my mind while I am doing other things, like having dinner with my wife. So when I got up the next morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do to deal with the mysterious attempt on my life and my wife's obvious involvement in it. I woke up early and got busy preparing for a quick trip to Los Angeles. I packed an overnight bag, asked the company travel agent to book me on the usual 3-day round-trip flight and a room at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where I always stayed in Los Angeles. I called a limo to the airport, had a quick breakfast, then went to the bedroom and woke Gina up. "Baby, I'm sorry for bothering you." I smiled at her and enjoyed the sight of her beautiful face as her eyes slowly opened and she smiled back at me. "Good morning, Alex." "I need to go to LA, honey," I said. "I got some emails this morning about a meeting we were trying to set up. It all came together unexpectedly, and I need to be there for a couple of days." It was a lie, but a very believable one. I traveled frequently, and business trips often came up at short notice. "All right, sweetheart. I'll warm the bed for you. You'll be back on Friday?" "Yeah, that's the plan. Just make sure you're the only one keeping the bed warm, okay, Gina?" She laughed out loud and then hugged me tightly. "There's no one here but me, baby." In the limo, I marveled at my wife's ability to lie to me. Either I was completely wrong, and she had nothing to do with the attempt on my life, or she was a damn fine actress. More than that, a cold-blooded monster. I hoped I was wrong, but I didn't see how it could be. During the short flight from San Jose to Los Angeles, I worked out some of the details of my plan. The key was total secrecy. Since Jeff Denham was apparently involved in the case, I had to avoid any action that might tip him off to my suspicions. And since he was the top security expert in the entire Bay Area, that meant bringing in someone from afar. As I took a cab from the airport, I went into an electronics store and paid cash for a discarded cell phone. Then, after checking into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, I called Dan Cameron and arranged to meet him for lunch outside his downtown office. Dan had been my right-hand man when I founded Apex, and we'd both gotten riddled with wealth when it took off. We had parted amicably 3 years earlier. He had moved to Los Angeles with his family and taken a job with a financial services company that, thanks to his brains, was doing very well. Dan and I saw each other a couple times a year, so it didn't seem strange to anyone that I was visiting him. We sat over sandwiches and a couple of beers in the restaurant's outdoor patio, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories of recent challenges and triumphs. He asked about Gina, told me about his wife Linda and what their children were doing. But when we finished eating, I leaned forward and spoke more seriously. "I'd like to ask you for a couple favors, Dan, if you don't mind." He looked interested, so I continued. "I have reason to believe that I may have some problems inside Apex." "Do you have a security firm you trust?" "Absolutely," he said. "Vertex Securities. Alan Newman, who heads it, is a first-rate specialist." "But you still have Jeff Denham, don't you?" "Yes, but I need someone on the outside." "Here's my first favor. Call Newman and tell him a good friend would like to talk to him on the phone and get some advice, but without mentioning my name." Without hesitation, Dan called on his cell phone and arranged to meet his friend later that day. "Thank you, Dan. I'm going to ask you to forget that this ever happened at all. Now, one more request of mine. In fact, it's a question I want to ask you. In the time you've known Gina, have you ever seen her acting inappropriately or suspiciously at all?" To my amazement, Dan looked away and his face reddened. I waited, and finally he looked at me again, a more guilty expression on his face than I'd ever seen before. "Alex, it's hard, you know? It's a little awkward. I hope you don't want to hit me." About 4 years ago, in the last few months before I resigned as COO and moved here, Gina had several times flirted with me. It wasn't just normal flirting, something beautiful women do all the time. On several occasions, she came very close to proposing to me. There must have been a look of surprise on my face because Dan raised his hands defensively as if he thought I might actually hit him. It wasn't obvious, Alex. She never said, "Do you want to take me to bed?" or anything like that. She'd come close to that line, but always subtly enough that it wasn't obvious. The offer was one that I could accept, but if I pretended not to understand, it was ambiguous enough that neither of us felt uncomfortable. That's why I never talked to you about it. It was very strange to me, believe me, but I didn't want to infuriate you, me or her, when it was so hard to explain. I was afraid you'd think I was making it all up. For a moment, he sat down with an unhappy look. I think I understand, Dan, and I'm not mad at you. So you just let the subtle invitations pass your ears, and after a while she backed off? That's right. It went on for a few weeks, and then it just stopped. Gina went back to being the friendly, slightly flirtatious woman she used to be. It was weird, like she was experimenting on me or something. And was there anything else? Any other strange behavior you noticed? He nodded, still looking unhappy. It's even worse than that, Alex. As soon as we moved here, Linda told me that she had a farewell dinner with Barbara Daniels, Josh's wife. Barbara was very upset. She told Linda that Josh had been cheating on her, and she was pretty sure it was with Gina. Josh Daniels had been at Apex for 7 years and was now our CFO. I leaned forward. How did Barbara know? She didn't know, wasn't sure. She'd caught Josh lying to her a couple times about his whereabouts, and there were some other things that convinced her he was cheating. As for Gina, it was much more vague. Maybe he came home smelling like her perfume one day or something. I don't remember all that. But I know for a fact that Linda and I wrestled with the question of whether to let you know about it together. I know for a fact that if she ever had an affair behind my back, I'd want my friends to tell me about it. But the thing is, it was all so lame. I hope I didn't make a mistake, but I didn't want to ruin your marriage over something that probably never happened in the first place. We talked for a few more minutes and then we parted. I wasn't angry with Dan. It was clear that he had done what he thought was right at the time. But his stories reinforced the idea that my wife was at the center of a conspiracy against me and my company. My phone conversation with Alan Newman was short and sweet. As soon as he got on the line, I got straight to the point. Mr. Newman, I need a top-notch security firm to help me with a confidential problem. As highly as Dan speaks of you, I wouldn't want it to be someone associated with me or my friends. So I'm wondering who else in this field is really good. Who would you hire yourself to handle a very serious, very confidential matter requiring financial and computer expertise? Newman thought for a minute and said, The first thing I would do is call Barry Asimov in San Diego. His firm and mine have worked together on some things. He's incredibly smart, hires good people and pays them well, and I've always been able to trust him. At my request, Newman hung up the phone, put me through to Asimov, and arranged a meeting for the next morning at 10 a.m., again without mentioning my name. Back at the hotel, I called Dan Cameron again. I asked him to rent a car from Hertz on his credit card and arrange for his friend Elliot to come pick up the car at the airport the next morning. That way, I would have the car and it wouldn't be traceable. Back at the Beverly Wilshire, I had a quick dinner, went upstairs, had my usual late-night conversation with Gina, and went to bed. The next morning, after having breakfast in my room, I dressed in slightly worn sweatpants, sunglasses, and a San Francisco Giants baseball cap, and left the hotel through a side entrance and caught a cab to the Hertz office at the Los Angeles airport. By 9:45, I was in San Diego and parked in the parking lot next to the Asimov office. Barry Asimov was a short, fat man in his 40s. He had a bad comb-over, and his brown suit didn't fit him very well. In short, he was a completely unimpressive figure. But within 10 minutes, I realized that he was one of the smartest people I had met in a long time. I knew I had to confide in someone, so I decided it would be Asimov. I got straight to the point. Mr. Asimov, I need a security firm that can do a serious assignment for me. It's a non-standard case, it will require a lot of high-tech computer work, and it's extremely confidential. I am willing to pay well for what I need, as well as cover all of your people's expenses. The job could take several weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised if your fee is in the 7 figures. For a few moments he stared at me intently. Why did you decide to turn to us? And why do you think we're up to the task? Someone recommended me to Alan Newman, and Newman spoke highly of you. Why not just use Newman? He's really good. Because I'm trying to cover my tracks. When we figure this out, you'll understand why I have good reason to be vigilant. Newman called you on my behalf, but he never got my name, so it's going to be pretty hard for someone to trace me back to you. Not impossible, but difficult. We talked some more about the preliminary preparations, and then Asimov said, "Let's hear the story. If this sounds like something we can handle, then we're in business." I told him everything. Who I was, what Apex did, and what it was worth, and about the recent attempt on my life. I told him that I suspected Gina and Denham were involved and why. And I repeated Dan Cameron's account of Gina's behavior and her possible affair with Josh Daniels, although I never once mentioned Cameron's name. When I finished, Asimov asked me a few clarifying questions. He clearly knew his business. Then he leaned back in his chair. I know Jeff Denham, at least by reputation. He's considered very cool. A lot of Silicon Valley folks swear by his work. So if he's really doing something questionable, we're going to have to be very delicate in our search for him. We talked some more, and finally Asimov said, "Here's what I'll advise you. Basically, you need two things. Someone to go through your books, internal documents, and memos very carefully, and someone else to check out Denham, your wife, and other high-ranking people at Apex. David Carlos is my best computer guy. I'll give him the first assignment. He's got 2 or 3 financiers working for him. They can analyze what they find. And I'll have Vera Anderson put together a surveillance team for the second part of the case." 30 minutes later, the 4 of us were sitting in a conference room eating takeout sandwiches and discussing my situation. Asimov mostly stayed out of it, letting Carlos and Anderson ask questions. But every now and then he would throw in his 2 cents, and I never ceased to be amazed at his wit. I couldn't help feeling that I was in good hands. By mid-afternoon, I was on my way back to Los Angeles. To my relief, Asimov understood why I couldn't give him a large fee right away and was willing to trust me on the basis of a promissory note drawn up by a notary in his office. Carlos was going to dig into Apex through my computer, which was connected to the firm's other important computers. His method was simple. He had me memorize the URL of the Asimov firm's website. Whenever I was alone in my office for 2 hours or more, I would go to that web address, download, and install on my computer a program from the site. This software allowed Carlos and his team to download and copy any files they wanted to view from my computer and those to which it was connected. Whenever I needed to leave the office, I closed the connection, logged out of the website, deleted the program from my computer, and covered my tracks in the usual way, deleting my browser history and so on. This method was not completely traceless, but only an expert who already suspected and scrutinized my computer would be able to figure out what was going on. Carlos estimates that in 20 hours of searching the web, he'll be able to find and download everything he needs to see if anything is wrong with Apex. Anderson's responsibilities were the usual surveillance of Gina and the senior management of Apex. We had agreed not to set up surveillance on Denham, since he, as a security person, would likely notice the attention, no matter how good the people at Asimov were. But she had people digging through phone calls and credit card records, and it was done at a safe distance, so Denham wouldn't find out. I emphasized to them that Denham was no fool. Following him or trying to tap his phone, his home or office would be a very bad idea. I bet he'll be out on us within a day or so. Understood, Vera replied. But I'd like to set up audio and video recording in your house, as well as a bug in Gina's purse and a tap on her cell phone. We agreed that I'd let them know when the house was empty. She promised her team could do the job in no more than 3 hours. The first thing they'll do is sweep the house to make sure Denham hasn't installed any surveillance equipment. As for Gina's purse and phone, I gave them the address of her tennis club. Vera assured me that it wouldn't be hard to pick the lock of her locker, quickly check her purse and phone for bugs, and plant my own. My role in this case was simple: go home and pretend everything was fine. To go on with my normal life at work and at home without letting my guard down. Asimov was confident that whoever tried to kill me would wait a little while before making another attempt. At the very least, they'll have to make sure your Lexus is destroyed so that no evidence of the first attempt remains. And in a few days, we should have enough information to figure out what's going on. So don't do anything stupid, Alex. Don't go into the woods or go into unfamiliar places. You might even try not to drive alone. Find an excuse to have Gina drive you to work, that sort of thing. But I don't think you need to worry right away. I smiled ironically at him. That's easy for you to say, Barry. But I'll be as careful as I can be. Before I left them, we worked out a communication system. It would be one way, from me to Asimov. I continued to use the discarded cell phones. When I was free to call, I would dial a number and ask for Larry Asimov. The receptionist at the front desk would correct my mistake and then transfer the call directly to Barry. We agreed that I would try to call at least once every other day. Back at the Beverly Wilshire, I had dinner and then called Gina to let her know I'd be home a day early. On the phone, she animatedly told me how lonely and cold she was in our big bed, and I promised to keep her warm on Thursday night. As I hung up the phone, I realized how crazy my wife's plot to kill me seemed. Before all of this started, I would say I had no illusions about Gina. She was beautiful, adventurous, and energetic, but she was also narcissistic and a little cold. She was not a heartbreaker who sheltered stray cats. Her number one interest was Gina, and it didn't take long to know her to realize that fact. And yet I would say that she loved me in her own way. She was not a warm, caring wife, but neither was I a particularly affectionate husband. We didn't often snuggle up to each other by the fireplace or take leisurely walks on beautiful beaches, except for the occasional Caribbean vacation when we made love during the day and went out to dinner and casinos in the evening. We were both ambitious, goal-oriented people. Even though Gina was no longer working, she was energetically pursuing the things that interested her: tennis, shopping, spending time with friends. I would say that in her own way, Gina loved me. In fact, I would say that Gina loved me as much as anyone could love anyone, given her basic nature. And given my own nature, that was enough for me. I liked our life together. I was content. But as it was, all of those assumptions were now hanging in the balance. Although it shocked me to think that she might be trying to kill me, the preliminary evidence definitely pointed that way. It wasn't hard to come up with a motive. Money, stupid. And if what Dan Cameron had told me was true, she could be connected to at least two of my partners, Josh Daniels from Apex and my friend Jeff Denham. In other words, if my worst suspicions were correct, she was a monster, a cold-blooded, heartless, vicious bitch. If she was really sleeping with Daniels, trying to seduce Dan Cameron, and somehow connected to Denham, it suggested that she was the driving force behind the whole thing. All the way on the plane to San Jose, I thought about how this could all turn out. I was sure I could be a good enough actor to fool Gina for a while. If she really was fooling me, it would be a challenge to see if I could do it just as well. And if by some miracle it turned out that my suspicions were wrong, I would be more than happy to open my heart to her love again. But if she was behind the attempt on my life, let's just say I already had some ideas about how I wanted the endgame to develop, and part of me was looking forward to it. Our reunion with Gina on Thursday night was great in several ways. First, the sex was amazing. She ordered Chinese food because she knows I love it. The second reason Thursday pleased me is that there was nothing special about it. As you can imagine, I watched Gina very closely to see any sign of guilt, anxiety, or wariness, but there was none of that. She acted as usual, talking about how she beat Sharon Combs 6, 4 in the third set, how she found the shoes she wanted, but unfortunately in the wrong color, and so on. I was sure she had no idea of my suspicions. When I arrived at the office on Friday, Jeff Denham had already called to say he was on his way over. No surprise there. Presumably, he wanted to report on the audit I had requested. Moreover, I was sure he would want to find out why I had asked for it. He would want to make sure I had no suspicions about what he was up to. Jeff walked in with a smile on his face, shook my hand and said, "Hey man, how do you like LA?" I immediately wondered how he'd heard about my impromptu trip. Maybe he'd talked to Gina. But I wasn't going to make him suspicious by asking about it, and he could call the office and find out from Meredith anyway. "Hey, Dowdle," I replied with a smile. Things were good in LA. Dan Cameron thought he had a lead for me on the new account, but I'm not sure it's going to work out. Still, it was good to see him. "Are you here to tell me what your guys found out?" He settled into the chair across from my desk. Yeah, it was routine. They found a couple of accounting errors, so minor stuff. I passed them on to Pogrebin downstairs. But there was no sign of suspicion, no leakage of funds, no new recipients, no evidence of outside interference. "What made you ask me to do the audit, Alex?" I watched Denham, and he seemed to be trying to make his questions sound as casual as possible. It was a good thing I'd seen it coming and was ready for a lie. I was sure it was nothing. But on Monday, I heard from Bert Williamson of 2K2. One of his vice presidents was at a meeting in New York, and there was a guy there who said he'd heard that one of the Silicon Valley software firms was under attack. It was all very vague, something about fake subsidiaries to which money was being sent. It sounded like bullshit, but it's been a while since I asked you to check our accounts, so I thought, what the hell. Sorry to put your guys through that, but it's always better to know. He grinned, and I thought he relaxed a little. No problem, buddy, that's what you keep us in reserve for. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing, and as soon as he left, I logged onto Carlos's URL, downloaded and installed his software, and let his guys start checking Apex's finances and communications. I wanted to give them as much time as possible, so I asked Meredith to order lunch, telling her that I would be eating at my desk today. She also brought me the San Jose Mercury News newspaper, which I hadn't had time to read that morning. And while I was eating my lunch, I was stopped by an article on the Metro page. Auto shop fire destroys 12 cars. I read the article carefully. A fire broke out in the back parking lot of Marshall Motors. The police don't yet know what caused the fire, but it completely destroyed a dozen cars and damaged 6 or 8 others. I wasn't that shocked. I guessed someone would steal my Lexus, but burning it to the ground was just as bad, maybe even better, because it hid which car was the target. I dialed Dominic, reminding myself to be very careful what I said. Barry and I both thought that Dowdle was probably bugging my office. Hi, Dominic, I just saw the Mercury News article. First of all, is everything okay? Yes, Alex, thank you. It was past 10 last night and no one was here. But if you're calling to inquire about your Lexus, I'm afraid I have some bad news. It's a total loss. It's okay, Dominic. That's what insurance is for. Is it okay if I drop by after work today for a few minutes? We agreed that he would stay here until I arrived at 6 p.m. and we stopped talking on the phone. I doubted that the security tapes at Marshall Motors could have picked up anything suspicious, but I was going to have Asimov's people check them to make sure. Thank God Dominic had written a report on the brake line and taken some pictures. Whoever had set my car on fire knew his business. Dominic walked me around the station as the police and the arsonist team gathered and drove away. They think it's suspicious, he said, but they doubt they can prove it. It looks like that old Ford truck parked next to your Lexus. He pointed to a mangled, blackened piece of metal. Had a gasoline leak, and somehow a spark ignited it. The explosion set all the other cars on fire, he continued, waving his hand vaguely in the direction of the destruction. We were standing in a parking lot, hardly near a bug, so I quietly asked him, "Is there any surveillance footage from last night?" Yes, from 2 different cameras, and the police took them away. But I thought you might want to see them, so I made a copy for you. They're in my office, in the drawer where we keep the coffee filters. God bless you, Dom. Now I have one more favor to ask of you, a big one. I asked Dominic to wait until Monday and then send the surveillance footage and his initial report on the car with photos to Barry Asimov's office. I told him the address and made him memorize it by repeating it several times. I also left my rented clunker at Dominic's, deciding that I would use cabs for a few days. If I pick them up in different places, acting spontaneously, it is very unlikely that any of them will turn out to be a trap. Walking to the nearest cab stand, I quickly called Larry, and within 2 minutes I was talking to Barry Asimov. Nothing much was going on. Carlos had taken a bunch of stuff off my computer, but it would take him a few more hours to complete the download. I promised to try to get to the office over the weekend. Vera Anderson's team scoured my house for bugs, didn't find any, and installed their own. They had also cracked the password to Gina's computer and copied her files, though they hadn't read them yet, and were ready to tackle Gina's purse the next time she played tennis. I told him about the fire at Marshall Motors, and that he would have the records and report within a few days. We agreed that I would call back early the following week. The next 2 days were so ordinary that it was almost strange. Gina and I did the usual weekend things. We slept in on Saturday, made love in the morning, and then Gina made scrambled eggs and bacon. Breakfast was the only meal she liked to cook, so we usually had dinner out, or Carmelita cooked for us. We fiddled around the table, feeding each other and giggling. It was also a good way to make sure she didn't poison the food. After lunch, we went to our clubhouse where I played golf with my usual foursome, and Gina hung out with her girlfriends by the pool. We stayed at the club to have dinner on the terrace with our friends Sam and Ashley, and then headed home where we made love again. On Sunday, we went our separate ways. I told Gina that I needed to spend part of the day at the office, which is not that uncommon. I asked her to give me a ride and headed to the club for tennis. I used my discarded cell phone to notify Barry, and he promised that Vera would bring her operative to the locker room while Gina played. I logged in, set up the program, and let Carlos do his thing. I had a lot of time to think, in particular to wonder why I didn't get more angry. After all, my wife and my best friend seemed to be plotting to kill me. And Gina appeared to be having fun with me, at least with Josh Daniels, if not the others. So why wasn't I blazing with rage? All I came to was first, that I don't know for sure yet, and second, that revenge is a dish best served cold. Out of sheer curiosity, I looked it up on the internet. It turns out that the phrase belongs to some man I've never heard of, Pierre Ambroise François Choderlos de Laclos, back in the 18th century. Somehow I managed to put my anger and sense of betrayal in a little box in one corner of my mind. I would have no trouble getting even, or spending even a minute feeling sorry for Gina or Dowdle, but until I had the proof in front of me, I would not allow myself to lose my mind. At about 5:30, Gina came to pick me up. Fresh from playing tennis, swimming, and showering, we bought some Indian food and had a quiet dinner at home. Neither of us seemed to want to make love, so we watched a couple episodes of The Sopranos, which we had recorded at TiVo and hadn't seen yet, and then went to bed. Such a normal weekend like we've never had before. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on Monday either. I pretended to work in my office, setting up the software so David Carlos could finish the download. But when I called Barry on Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the back booth of a downtown bar, I discovered that his people had made significant progress. I want to tell you a few things, Alex. Starting with your car. It was arson, just as we suspected. It was committed by people who knew what they were doing. Two guys dressed in black, wearing ski masks, so we'll never identify them. They made a tiny hole in the Ford's gas tank, then splashed some more gasoline they'd brought with them, making sure there was more under the Lexus. Then they threw a match and got the hell out of there. What about Dominic's photos and documents? Could that be evidence? I think it will convince the police that someone tried to kill you, certainly, but it's hard to see how they can link it to Denham or your wife without more evidence. I thought for a moment. Okay, thanks. What else did you find out? David is done with your computer, and his financial people think they've succeeded in something. They need another day or two to be sure. It looks like someone has been withdrawing money for 8 months, starting a little over a year ago, through some dummy subsidiary. Maybe $2 million was stolen, no more. Then the whole thing was quietly shut down. David's sure he can trace it back to a certain computer in your office if you give him a little more time. Is there any chance of a refund? You can't say for sure, but it's unlikely. The best chance is to find out who did it, take him to the police, and demand the money back. If the person who took the money has already spent it, it's probably gone forever. I didn't like the sound of it, but I knew that losing $2 million wasn't going to break me or the company. That was the principle, and it made me very angry. Still, compared to murder, losing money was a lot less serious. Is there any news on Gina? Did Vera's people get the bugs and get into her computer files? He cleared his throat. Things don't look good, Alex. I won't kid you. It looks like she was probably connected to 2 of the 3 Apex guys whose names you gave us, Josh Daniels and Eddie Kreitler. And on Sunday, she called Denham from her cell phone, which makes it clear she's sleeping with him. Jesus, I said. I realized I wasn't that shocked, but it was still a blow to the head to get such a full confirmation of my suspicions, all at once. Barry's voice distracted me from my gloomy thoughts. Look, give us a couple more days to figure all this out. Vera's people are monitoring Gina's cell phone, the bug in her purse, and the bugs in your house. They're also still working on her cell phone records and credit cards. Turns out she had 2 cards under her maiden name and the monthly bills came to her mailbox. Did you know anything about that? Hell no, I replied, still feeling a little dazed. Alex, I know this really sucks. Do you think you can hold out a little longer and keep your cool while we wrap this up? I know I have to, Barry, so I guess I will. Do you think they'll come at me again? There was a short pause, then he said, They might. But they'll be very careful because the news about your car is still so fresh. They won't want anyone putting two and two together. So if you take reasonable precautions, stay away from dark, lonely places and things like that, you'll be all right. Would you like me to put a couple men on you? No, there's too great a chance that Denham's boys will pick up on it. No, I've got to take care of myself. I'll call you on Thursday. I'm sorry, Alex, he said in a surprisingly soft voice. Yeah, me too, I replied and hung up. Wednesday may have been the least fun day of my adult life. I knew my marriage was over. I knew that my best friend, a guy I'd known since junior high school, who I trusted more than anyone else, was having fun with my wife. And I knew that one of them, or both of them, wanted to destroy me. That's what I carried inside me, and there was nothing I could do about it, until there was no one I could tell about it. So I wandered aimlessly around the office, pretending to work, chatting with Meredith from time to time, while my mind raced with the problem of how I was going to avenge myself. The details, of course, depended on what Barry and his team would find out, but the general outline of what I wanted to do was already clear in my mind. And as my anger, my sense of outrage and betrayal and cold rage built up, I found myself looking forward to what was to come. On Thursday, I waited until late afternoon to call Asimov, wanting to give his people as much time as possible. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I went to my usual place to get a haircut, and then, instead of going back to the office, I went into the diner, settled at a table in the back with a cup of coffee, and made the call. Barry and I talked on the phone for almost an hour. I asked a lot of questions, made sure I understood everything he was telling me, and discussed various options with him. When we finally finished, he wished me luck and we said goodbye. I had what I needed, and I was going to move on. That night, like the previous ones, I earned an Oscar at home by treating Gina with the same tenderness as usual. I won't claim to be a better liar or actor than she was, but I guess I was just as good. We had dinner of fried chicken prepared by Carmelita, watched a movie on TV. It occurred to me that this would probably be the last time I have sex with Gina. Probably the last time I touch her at all. I left early on Friday, not wanting to talk to Gina again, and had a quick breakfast on the way to the office. I took Gina's car, a BMW convertible. I was sure her car hadn't been messed with, and I wanted to get to work alive today. When she discovered her car was gone, she would no doubt be annoyed, but by the end of today, she would care the least. When Meredith arrived around 9 o'clock, I called her into my office, wished her a good morning, and handed her the list I had compiled. I'll have to change my schedule for today, I said. Will you please take care of getting this all set up for me? She looked at my list and I saw her eyes widen. She looked up at me in surprise, clearly expecting an explanation, but when I remained silent, she just nodded her head and said, "Okay, boss, I'll take care of it." I smiled at her and she walked out of the office. My morning was pretty uneventful, except for a 10 o'clock appointment with Nancy Leggett. She was one of the principals of Leggett and Hine, a PR firm that had worked for Apex for about 6 years and had become a good friend of mine. Nancy was an attractive, businesslike woman about my age. She was very witty and had a great sense of humor. In fact, she was one of the few women I might have dated had I not been married to Gina. We talked in my office for almost an hour in quiet voices, with the radio on full volume so no one would overhear. All they could hear was a Beethoven symphony and a few Strauss waltzes. At my request, Meredith ordered me a sandwich and a soda, which I ate at my desk, reading the newspaper. The real fun was going to start this afternoon around 1 o'clock. Meredith called to say that Jeff Denham was calling. He'd like to see me right away. I smiled to myself and said, "Tell him I can't see or talk to him right now, Meredith. He can meet me at 4 like I asked." Did that mean Denham had bugged my office? If so, an hour of loud music during my meeting with Nancy Leggett would certainly have made him suspicious. But he might also have been wary of something else. Perhaps he'd tapped Meredith's phone or her office and heard her making arrangements for the day I'd asked her to take care of. Either way, I knew he was going crazy, and the thought gave me great pleasure. "Wait, you bastard, it's going to get worse." I walked into the conference room a few minutes before 1 o'clock and found it set up exactly as I had requested. The large conference table was empty except for the company laptop at one end, which was open and working. At the far end of the room was a video camera on a tripod, with one of our technicians standing behind it, ready to shoot. "Hello," I said. "It's Arthur, isn't it?" He smiled broadly, recognizing that he was remembered. "Yes, Mr. Macmillan, Arthur Wentner." Everything is set up and ready to go. Would you like me to stay and run it, or shall I just show you how it works? Just show me, please, Arthur. I want him to work all day filming the meetings I'm going to have here. He set it up to block off the part of the room where me and my guests would be sitting, and we did a quick 30-second test. Everything worked perfectly. The film cartridge is rated for 6 hours, so you'll be just fine, Mr. McMillan. I thanked Arthur and he left. I fiddled with my laptop for a minute, then set it to screensaver mode and leaned back in my chair. Not 2 minutes later, Josh Daniels knocked on the door and walked in hesitantly. It was finally starting. Josh, come in and have a seat, please, I said with a friendly smile. You don't mind if we record the meeting, do you? He looked worried and confused. Alex, what's wrong? We'll get to that in a minute. Did you understand what I asked Meredith to tell you? This meeting is completely confidential. You agree not to talk about any aspect of it with anyone at Apex, now or in the future. He shrugged, still feeling awkward. Yeah, sure, Alex, you're the boss. Is everything okay with the shooting? I guess so, yes. But why are all these... I interrupted him. Hold on a second, Josh. In a few minutes, everything will be clear. I leaned back in my chair, looking at him with an indifferent expression and watching his confusion. Then I finally spoke. Josh, I know all about you and my wife. He became visibly agitated, trying in vain to appear calm. He couldn't keep his eyes on my eyes, which were fixed on him. They kept slipping away from my face. Alex, I don't know. What you're talking about? No need to pretend, Josh. I have the pictures. I uttered that lie with complete confidence, patting the thick manila folder lying next to me on the table. But now I'd like to hear all about it from you, please. You're in really deep shit, and if you're not completely honest with me, it's only going to get worse. I'd been involved in some pretty tough negotiations in my business career, but I'd never seen a man who looked more miserable than Josh did at that moment. And I savored every moment of his misery, waiting for him to try to get out of what he'd been caught doing. After a moment, he said, Alex, can we turn the camera off? No, we can't. Just keep going, Josh. I'm waiting. When did it start and how? And how could you justify entertaining the boss's wife for months behind his back? He kept his eyes on the table. Jesus, Alex. This started about 4 years ago and lasted about 3 months. I think you know all of this. Gina seduced me. That's what it was, pure and simple. Linda and I knew you and her for years, and she was always a bit of a flirt. God, who wouldn't be with a body like that? He stopped suddenly, shuddering slightly at the thought of how that sounded. I just waited, and finally he continued. Anyway, one day she flirted heavily with me at a Christmas party we were having in that old ballroom. It was pretty obvious she was flirting with me, but I couldn't believe she meant it. Then 2 weeks later, she called me when you were in Chicago and asked me to come to her house. When I came in, she offered me this. I couldn't believe it. I tried to leave, I swear to God, but she dragged me inside, locked the door, and just stood across from her, looking at me with a smile on her face. Then she said something crazy like, I've wanted you for a long time, Josh, and now I'm going to have you. I'm sorry, Alex, really sorry. I feel like the world's worst asshole right now. But I was 38 years old, and never in my life had I even kissed a woman as amazing as Gina. I knew it was wrong, but I let it happen. A team of guys with flamethrowers couldn't have gotten me out of there. She took my hand, led me to the bedroom, and we, had sex for 2 hours. Josh sat with his head down on his hands and stared at the floor, completely defeated. How long did it last, and how did it end? That's the way it was. Then suddenly one day she declared she'd had enough, and wasn't even particularly nice about it. I'm sure it was because I didn't want to do what she wanted. And what was that? I asked. For the first time since the confession began, he looked up at me. Now he could look me in the face. She wanted me to create some fake accounts to siphon money out of Apex. It was about the money, Alex, and nothing else. She said you had all those millions and she wanted most of it for herself. She asked me a lot of questions. In bed, after. About how our accounting systems worked, whether it was somehow possible to create fake accounts, how dangerous it was, and so on. At first, I thought it was just a joke, but she brought it up over and over again. In the end, I just said I wasn't going to do it. He straightened in his chair. I won't lie to you, Alex, not anymore. I didn't refuse out of morality, out of loyalty to you or Apex. By then I was willing to do anything just to be with Gina. But I didn't see a way to do what she wanted without significant risk of getting caught, and I didn't want to go to jail even for her. When Gina realized I really wasn't going to do it, she just dumped me. And it was a good thing because Linda was sure I was having an affair. But it was over before she could get proof. I denied it over and over, just lying and lying and lying and lying, swearing it was nothing more than a bunch of extra projects at work. I don't think she really believed me, but she kind of let it go. And I did everything I could to make it up to her, and thank God we're still together. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Much of what Josh had told me was news to me. Barry's people had managed to find evidence of the affair, lots of phone conversations between Josh and Gina, and a few steamy emails from her to him, and they'd pinpointed the dates. But Josh's story that Gina was the instigator was new information, as were her hopes of stealing money from the company. I stood up. Okay, Josh, we're done for the day. Go home for the weekend. Don't come back to your office and don't say a word about this conversation to anyone, inside or outside the company. Is that clear? I spoke in a neutral, cold tone. Yes, Alex. He sounded resigned and scared. We'll talk on Monday, Josh. In the meantime, just go home to Linda and the kids. My conversation with Eddie Kreitler at 1:30 p.m. went something like this. Eddie rose through the ranks at Apex. He ran global sales and marketing and then became the #2 operations director, under me, of course. According to phone and email records, Gina had chosen him a few months after her breakup with Josh, and it had been over 6 months. He was single, so the two of them didn't have to be so careful. And as Eddie recounted, Gina had brought up the prospect of stealing from the company little by little, probably not wanting to scare him. According to him, it had started out as a joke between them and only gradually turned into something serious that she wanted him to do. According to him, he even sketched out several possible options, but never found one that didn't put him at too much risk. Honestly, Alex, it was because the company is well run. The controls on our finances are strict, and I didn't see how I could pull it off. And when I finally admitted it to Gina, she was done. My conversation with Bernard Eisenhart, Apex's treasurer, took a very different turn. When I said, "Bernie, I know all about you and my wife." He looked at me with a blank stare, his expression astonished but not at all upset. "What do you mean, Alex?" "Bernie, I have pictures right here." I held out a manila folder. "There's no point in denying it." "Pictures?" He was a little angry. "I don't know what you've got there, Alex, but if they're pictures of what I think they are, you need to be talking to Gina, not me." I turned my back and got out of there. I believed him too. His irritation was so obvious, and Barry told me that they hadn't found anything between him and Gina except for one phone call from her to him. "Okay, Bernie, I believe you. Could you tell me about it, please?" He was still furious. "She invited me, Alex. Blabbed some bullshit to me about a surprise party, wanted to see what you liked. Not that it made much sense to me. And when I got there, well, you've seen the pictures. Dressed in a see-through nightie that didn't reach her hips. She pulled me inside, kissed me, and tried to put her tongue in my mouth. I'm sure it's in the pictures. What happened next?" I told her I couldn't do anything to her, that she was married to my boss, unlocked the door, and walked out to my car. I just sat there, waited for my boner to go away, and then drove off. "I didn't think there was any point in telling you, Alex." Nothing happened, and frankly, I was afraid you'd blame me instead of Gina. So I just let it go. And now you're blaming me for... His voice rose with anger, and I interrupted him. "Calm down, Bernie, calm down!" "Let me explain. I just found out that Gina cheated on me with at least 2 other employees of the company, and I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. I believe you. I believe that nothing happened between you two." His anger vanished, replaced by surprise. 2 more men? Jesus! He sat back down. "Actually, I remember there were rumors about her and Josh, a few years ago." I didn't believe it, of course. Figured that's what people would say, considering how attractive she was. But after she'd made that crazy lunge in my direction, I'd even wondered. but it was none of my business anyway. We talked for a few more minutes. I assured him of my trust, reassured him that I had accused him, and reminded him to keep our conversation completely confidential. Then he left. As I sat pondering what I had learned, Meredith walked into the conference room. Alex, Jeff Denham is outside and he's practically jumping out of his skin. I know you asked me to make an appointment for 4 o'clock, but he's about to wet himself. Says he has to see you right this minute, that it's life and death and so on. If it weren't for the guards you asked me to post outside the room, he'd be in here by now. What do you want me to do with him? I smiled at her. Give me 5 minutes and then you can let him come in. I wanted to spend those 5 minutes enjoying what was about to happen. It's not every day you find out your best friend wants you dead. And it's certainly not every day you get a chance to even... When Jeff Denham entered the conference room, he was practically shaking. He looked like a man who had been put on an espresso drip, though he tried to hide it. Hey Alex, what's going on? It was said with careful casualness, but his voice was a few tones higher than usual. Hey Dowdle, thanks for stopping by. Would you like some coffee or something? He shook his head. What kind of video camera is that? I smiled and said, I just thought I might need a record of the meetings I'm having today. You don't mind, do you? He looked very worried, but all he said was, not at all, of course not. But what's the mystery? Meredith didn't say anything to me, and when I passed Bernie Eisenhart coming out of the elevator, he just gave me a strange nod and went on his way. I turned the laptop around so it was in front of him and said, Take a look. When he touched the embedded mouse, the screensaver disappeared, revealing a still frame from a video shot in my bedroom earlier that week. It showed a naked Gina lying on her back, legs spread wide, and a naked Jeff with his head buried between her legs and his hands around her hips, devouring her. She threw her head back in sheer ecstasy. Denham looked up at me a split second later, a look of shock on his face. I waited until he said, Alex, and then I hit him with my right fist right under his right eye as hard as I could. He flew backward, hitting his head on the carpet, and the chair slid smoothly away from the table. I stood over him, pulling the thick winter glove off my hand. It still hurt like hell, but at least I didn't think I'd broken my knuckles. I sat for a while, smiling grimly and massaging my sore arm, waiting for Denham to come to his senses. It was several minutes before he opened his eyes and groaned, groping his face with his hand. When his head cleared a little, he looked around for me, then quickly crawled away from me and sat against the wall, looking both confused and wary. You want more, you nasty freak? I can still hit you with my other hand. I spoke casually, almost flippantly. God, no, Alex. I saw him look toward the door, as if figuring out if he could break free or if I'd catch him before he got to it. Forget it, Dowdle. Those 2 guards are still outside. You're not leaving just yet. We sat for a while longer and I watched him sullenly ponder his situation. No doubt he hoped that I did not know everything, but he was bitterly disappointed. Okay, Dowdle, get up and sit back down at the table. Don't worry, I'm not going to hit you again. What lies ahead of you is going to hurt a lot more. He cautiously rose and sat down in a chair 10 feet away from me, never taking his eyes off my face. I'm not going to waste any more time on you, you piece of shit. My best friend since junior high school. You're a goddamn disgrace. He didn't say anything back, so I continued. Not only did you entertain my wife and try to steal my money, but you tried to kill me. Here he jerked his head sharply, looking at me in shock and alarm. And I'll make sure you make some new friends in prison. Gina confessed everything to me, I continued, now lying through my teeth. And I know that the theft and the murder plan were all your idea. Just being a cuckold wasn't enough for you, huh? Did you think that by cutting me off you'd complete the picture? For God's sake, Alex, it's not true. There was utter desperation in his voice. She's lying. I admit that I had an affair with Gina. There's no point in denying it now. But stealing the money and then killing you was all her idea. I tried over and over again to talk her out of it. And when that didn't work, you said what the hell and organized to tamper with my car, right? He hung his head without looking at me. After a few minutes, he told me everything. The affair had started the same way it had with Josh and Eddie. Gina was going full force. He swears he fought her off 2 or 3 times before he gave in, but that doesn't really matter, does it? When she had been having fun with him for about 3 months, she talked about stealing some of my money. Unlike previous co-conspirators, Denham was willing to go along. He invented a subsidiary and found a way to have legitimate payments put into accounts receivable and then diverted to the invented company. Because he was head of security, which included the finance division, he managed to make it so that no one else could spy on him closely enough to discover what he was up to. In 7 months, he managed to embezzle about $1.8 million. All of this was pretty much what Barry's people had already figured out. But that wasn't enough for Gina, Alex. Denham was speaking freely now. Ignoring the camera, he was eager to get his point across. He wasn't such a complete asshole that he didn't feel guilty about what he'd done to me. She said you had so much money that $1 million or $2 million just wasn't enough for her. It wasn't fair. So I closed the account and covered my tracks as carefully as I could. A month later, she started talking about killing you. Then we could be together, Dowdle. And things like that. You could run the company or let the other fellows run it while you and I spend this fine money. She wouldn't back down. Every time we were together, she had a new idea about what we'd do later when you died, and she inherited your money. And you believed her? He sighed heavily. I was a fool, Alex. I convinced myself that she loved me. I was definitely in love with her, or so I thought. I held on for a long time, and then she started hinting that if I didn't do this for her, we might not be meant to be together. After a few weeks of these conversations, I started to feel like this was my only way out. Alex, Gina is a cold-blooded monster. As soon as she got the idea in her head, she was like a terrier with a bone. She just wouldn't let it go. So I made some calls and found a guy who knew how to do this sort of thing. He said it wouldn't be hard to tamper with the brake line, and if it was done right, no one would suspect a thing. He looked at me with a haggard expression. I know you'll never forgive me. How can you? But I still can't believe I did it. It's like I was a different person, like Gina programmed me and I was following her instructions, like I was a little monsterette. Were you going to try again? I already knew the answer, having watched the video Asimov had sent me. In a choked voice, he said, She wanted to. I insisted that we should wait a few weeks so no one would suspect about the car. I tried my best to talk her out of it, but eventually she'd make me try again. She wasn't going to give up. He covered his face with his hands. Denham was broken. He was finished. He didn't even try to deny the truth. I asked him about the stolen money, and he didn't hesitate to give me the numbers of the 2 offshore accounts where he had stashed it. All but about $60,000 which Gina had already spent. It was a little after 4:30. I handed Denham over to the guards who would hold him until the police arrived. Then I went back to the conference room to wait for Gina, who was due to arrive at 5 o'clock. With each new revelation, the unbelievable and painful truth grew deeper. My wife was not only having fun with me and stealing my money, she was trying to destroy me. How could a normal person understand that? What did it mean that I had lived with this woman, for the most part very happily, for over 8 years without having the slightest idea of who and what she really was? Gina walked into the conference room, about 20 minutes late as usual, looking glamorous and slightly annoyed. Baby, what is all this? Meredith practically ordered me to meet you here, and she hasn't told me anything about what you want. Is there something going on with the company? And why the hell did you leave me without a car this morning? I watched her carefully and realized that the irritation was feigned. Behind it was Gina's concern. In all likelihood, she and Denham had been burning up the phone lines today, trying to figure out what was going on. Honey, please sit down, okay? This isn't going to be easy for me. I sat quietly, as if struggling with my emotions, and watched her try to remain calm. I was determined to enjoy every damn minute of it. After a long pause, during which Gina's knee began to wobble nervously, I spoke. Gina, I know you cheated on me. How could you do this to me? I thought you loved me. She tried to sit still, but her eyes widened and she tensed slightly. I watched as a look of sadness and compassion appeared on her face. It was impressively fast. She must have expected it. Baby, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. It's just, I guess, you were away from home so much and She interrupted and began to cry. Convincing. I might have softened if I didn't know the whole truth. Still crying, she reached across the table and took my hand. Alex, is there any way you can forgive me? I don't want to lose you. I don't know, Gina. I just don't know. Then, after another pause, I need you to tell me about it. When and how it started, and when it ended. And why? Above all, why? Why did you do it? Oh, baby, please don't make me talk about it. We can get through this, you'll see? I can make it up to you. I'll be the best, most perfect wife you could ever have. No, Gina, I said, giving my voice a cracked tone. If we can ever get past this, you have to be honest with me. Here and now. When did it start? How long did it last? I had her by the thread and enjoyed it. She didn't know which of her lovers I knew about. I had deliberately spoken of her affair in the past tense to make her think it might not be Denham, but someone else. Now she had to guess, and if she was wrong, she would confess to an affair I, supposedly, didn't even know about. Reluctantly, she began to speak. Like I said, Alex, you were away a lot and I felt alone. Abandoned. I know it's unfair, you've worked so hard and succeeded so well, built a company for both of us, but I let him master me, I guess. And then I had a couple drinks, and when he made the pass, I just gave in. I laughed to myself. Nice try, Gina. But you're not off the hook yet. When was that, Gina? I really need to know. She suddenly rose from her seat, walked around the table, and tried to throw herself into my arms with tears in her eyes. Alex, I'm so sorry. But I held her at arm's length, still looking into her eyes, and asked, when was that? I saw the mental calculations appear and disappear in her eyes in a split second. She sighed, sat down in the chair next to me, and said, a little over 4 years ago. She had bet on Josh Daniels. I grinned to myself. Nice try, Gina. Too bad you don't know there's no such thing as the right choice. And? She looked at me, irritation peeking out slightly behind the mask of sadness, but she realized she really had no choice. And it went on for months. I don't know why, Alex, I just went a little crazy. I knew it wasn't right, and finally just told Josh that I couldn't see him anymore. It was ruining me. I cried the whole time and... Josh? I interrupted her with a shout. You cheated on me with Josh too? If you could have seen the look on her face at that moment. In desperation, with eyes widened with fear, she said, Baby, I don't understand what... Eddie Kreitler wasn't the only one? I yelled at her. You slept with 2 of my employees? What the hell were you thinking? She tried to rush in to slow me down, but I was on edge. For God's sake, Gina, how can we fix this? How can I ever trust you again? God, everyone at Apex must be laughing at me behind my back. The boss's wife takes care of the employees. Just stay in line. She'll get to you soon enough. Who else have you been having fun with, the janitor? No, baby, I swear it was only 2. And how am I supposed to believe that? Demanded I. As far as I know, you've had fun with everyone I've ever dealt with. Did you have fun with Dan Cameron before he left? How about our friend Archie, or Debbie's husband Peter? Or Dowdle? How can I be sure? Gina saw her opportunity and jumped up. Her face took on a solemn expression, and she reached out and took both my hands in hers. In a quiet, serious voice, she said, Alex, God knows it was just those 2. And that was years ago. I regretted it so much. I've been completely faithful to you ever since, and I will be for the rest of my life. There was silence in the room. I looked at her, tiredly, sadly, hiding the angry joy I felt at her impending doom. Okay, Gina, I said slowly. Okay, you cheated on me with 2 of my coworkers, but then you stopped. You picked yourself up and decided to go back to being my faithful wife. Is that right? Yes, baby, she said, and there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Well, I guess I need to ask you one more thing, I said, sliding the laptop over to her. Can you tell me what it is? I touched 2 keys. This time, as the splash screen disappeared, the video came into motion. We saw Jeff's head bobbing between Gina's thighs, saw her arch her back in pleasure, and heard her harsh voice. Oh, yes, yes! Oh, baby! Oh, Dowdle, do it! Yes, baby, do it. I had to hand it to Gina. She didn't jump away from the laptop like it was a snake, didn't try to run out of the room, didn't even shriek. Just a quick "oh," choked almost as soon as it started. Then, after a few seconds, she closed the laptop and turned to face me. Moments before, her face had become almost unrecognizable. Now it was a tight, angry mask, eyes glittering and mouth contorted into a strained grin. "Okay, Alex, you got me." "Good for you. What do you want me to say?" "Yes, I had fun with Dowdle, and he did it way better than you ever could." "Really, Gina? Does that explain why you tried to destroy me?" The question shook her. She froze, staring at me for a moment, and the best she could manage was, "What? I have no idea what you're talking about." "Really?" I said softly. I opened the computer, pressed a few buttons, and turned it so she could see it. On the screen was our kitchen, with Gina and Denham sitting at the table, both in bathrobes. Gina was talking. "I don't care, Dowdle. So we got unlucky and he didn't wreck the car. You can try again." "Gina, you don't realize how risky this is. If someone starts investigating what happened, they'll—" "Bullshit. The car burned up, right? Completely destroyed, along with a bunch of others. Who would suspect anything? We just need some other way to destroy it. Can't we poison it?" I pressed a button and the computer went silent. I smiled at Gina. "I wish I had that video, baby. It's going to be really hard to stand in court and deny you had anything to do with it." I stared into Gina's cold eyes as the wheels turned behind them. She was like a rat caught in a nasty trap, looking for a way out at every corner. She made no further attempt to look regretful or even affectionate. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and contemptuous. "You'll never go to the police with that, Alex. It would make you a laughingstock, and it would make Apex a laughingstock. The head of a multi-billion-dollar company and his wife entertains the employees. You'll be the world's fool." She sat there with a satisfied and contemptuous look. I picked up the phone and asked Meredith to get Nancy Leggett. When she came in, she sat across the table from Gina and me, looking at my wife as if she were a bag of dirty laundry. "Nancy, my lovely wife Gina thinks it would be bad for me and the business if I arrested her for grand larceny and attempted murder." "Why don't you tell her what you told me this morning?" Smiling broadly, Nancy said, "Of course, Alex. This story, Gina and Denham and their dastardly plot, is going to be the loudest story on cable news for some time to come. It has everything: money, adultery, attempted murder, an extremely attractive woman, a man betraying his best friend, yes, anything. It will be bigger than Paris Hilton, bigger than the Anna Nicole Smith saga. Gina will be harlot of the month for a while, and Apex will get more publicity than it has ever gotten in its entire existence. More than it could buy with $500 million in advertising, all for free. Alex will end up on the Larry King Show, the Today Show, little else. He'll be an honest, hard-working businessman victimized by an unprincipled whore and her puppet. By the time the trial is over and Gina and Denham are in jail, Apex will be written about in Businessweek and the Wall Street Journal. Someone will give Alex the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The company will get maybe $100 million in new business, and Alex will get 10,000 letters from women just dying to be the next Mrs. McMillan. Some of them will send pictures. It's a godsend for Apex. Your husband, Gina, isn't having much fun, at least not right now, but you're about to make a rich, successful man even richer and more successful. As his public relations representative, I couldn't dream of coming up with something this good." Nancy winked at me, then stood up and left the room. Gina leaned back in her chair, her eyes slightly unfocused, and her mouth drooping in a deep, wry smile. For perhaps the first time in all the years I'd known her, she looked completely defeated. I picked up the phone. "Meredith, you can call the police. The next 14 months may or may not have made up for what came before them. It's hard to say, but they brought their share of entertainment. The police charged Gina and Denham with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and 6 or 7 other things. Apex's attorneys also immediately filed a civil suit to recover the stolen money, the whereabouts of which we knew because of Denham's confession. And of course, I immediately filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. Fortunately, because of the criminal and civil lawsuits, all of Denham's accounts and all of Gina's and mine that she had access to were frozen. By the time the 2 of them were released on bail, they didn't have the money to hire expensive lawyers to defend themselves, and had to make do with public defenders for a while. Rather unpleasant. I kicked Gina out of the house and had no trouble getting a restraining order from the judge. The video of her and Denham discussing a second attempt to kill me was quite compelling. She got Susan, one of her tennis buddies, to temporarily put her up in Susan's guest house. Gina made no attempt to contact me, not that I expected or wanted her to. She must have realized there was nothing she could say to change anything. The Monday after Gina's day of reckoning, I called Josh and Eddie in and fired each of them. Neither of them were much surprised. Eddie asked only that in case a future employer came to me for a reference, I'd be prepared to say that his work at Apex had been good. I had no problem agreeing. Josh tried to make a deal with me. If I helped him find a decent job, he would agree to testify against Gina at her trial. I laughingly kicked him out of my office. I reminded him that I already had his adultery confession and her attempt to get him to steal from the company on tape. If he didn't agree to testify, the prosecutors would just issue him a subpoena. I have appointed Bernie Eisenhart as Josh's CFO, and I am confident that he will do a top-notch job. I have asked him to take on the job of interviewing for his own replacement as treasurer and for Eddie's position. Gina and Denham's trial started about 7 months later, and it was a lot of fun. It lasted almost 3 weeks. I went to court several times but didn't feel the need to be there every day. Not surprisingly, they were unable to deny what they had done, and each attorney's defense focused on making the other look like the main villain. Gina's main virtues were her beauty and her ability to behave on the witness stand. The men on the jury ate her up. The problem, of course, was that the videotape clearly showed her pushing a reluctant Dowdle to make another attempt on my life, and even Gina couldn't overcome that. They were both found guilty on about 8 counts, including all the main ones. By the end of the trial, all this publicity had allowed Gina to sign several magazine and television interview contracts, which allowed her to pay for an expensive lawyer. The new attorneys have appealed, and so far have managed to delay sentencing, but Gina and Dowdle face 10 to 15 years. All of the money they stole was returned to Apex, less $72,000. Since Denham's security firm had gone out of business, I needed someone to take over that role for Apex. When I flew to Los Angeles to pay Barry Asimov and thank him for all he had done, he suggested I hire David Carlis. David wanted to move to the Bay Area, and you've seen how well he's doing. I think you won't regret offering him a contract, and with you as his primary client, he can build his business there. So I offered Carlis a job, and it seems to be going very well so far. When I was in Asimov's office, he surprised me with another video I didn't know about. I hadn't had time to talk to him before, and it had nothing to do with the threat from Gina and Denham. Come into the screening room for a moment, Alex. I think you'll enjoy it. To my surprise and delight, in bed with Gina lay Charlie Pemberton, my lawyer. He was almost 60 and didn't seem to be giving Gina much pleasure. Apparently, Gina had seduced him a couple months ago and put him to work trying to find a way around our prenup. Not surprisingly, since Charlie was an excellent lawyer and had drafted it himself, he hadn't had much success. But that didn't stop him from taking advantage of Gina whenever she gave him the opportunity. I especially enjoyed setting Charlie's ass on fire. I accused him publicly and as loudly as I could of unethical behavior, and the California Board of Legal Ethics had no choice but to disbar him. I also sued him and took about $240,000 from his savings that I donated to charity. All of this gave me great pleasure. As far as I and Apex were concerned, everything happened exactly as Nancy Leggett had predicted. First of all, there was a flurry of publicity on the cable news channels and in the tabloids. I was on CNN, on the cover of Fortune magazine, on the front page of the National Enquirer, and just about everywhere in between. Nancy had to hire 3 new employees to handle the workload, and she and I met almost every day to strategize and decide which interviews and other offers were worth accepting. In the first 6 months after the article was published, Apex's business grew by nearly 20%. Nancy was also right about the letters from women. At this point, there were over 8,000 of them, and they kept coming in. After reading the first couple hundred, several with provocative and even downright lewd photos, I turned the job of answering them over to one of my interns. For all I know, this guy gets sex on a regular basis. Local divorcees and single women were also getting in touch. I was propositioned by more women than I knew existed in the world, but to my surprise, I found I wasn't that interested. Gina made me very happy sexually until things fell apart. I went on dates with the 4 women I was attracted to, but quickly realized that the promiscuous lifestyle didn't appeal to me. After a few weeks of working closely with Nancy, I realized that she was the one I wanted to date. We have been dating for almost a year now. Neither of us is in a hurry to get married, but it may happen after a while. Last Sunday was my birthday and Nancy gave me something special as a present. We spent Saturday night at her house, watched an old Humphrey Bogart movie, and then got down to it. Sunday morning she let me sleep in while she made breakfast for us and carried it into the bedroom. When I opened my eyes, I saw her standing there in her robe, holding breakfast on a large tray. We ate together, and then she said, "Is your present ready?" "I'm actually wearing it under my robe." I raised my eyebrows questioningly, but she only grinned. "Ready?" she said. She was wearing a white t-shirt. On the t-shirt was a scanned image of a grinning Gina, no doubt taken from a picture of her that Nancy had found at my house. Underneath the picture, in large block letters, it said, "I survived a monster." I laughed, and then I said, "Come here, you!" Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.